Berlin, August 27, 2025. Germany is entering a decisive moment in its defence policy, one that could shape not only its armed forces, but also Europe's security architecture for decades to come. In a landmark move, Chancellor Friedrich Merz's cabinet has approved a draft bill introducing a new voluntary military service. The proposal, debated for months in Berlin, reflects a clear shift in the nation's strategic thinking. Under the plan, young Germans will be able to volunteer for 6 months of service, a short but intensive period designed to balance civic duty with modern realities. The Defence Ministry hopes this will double the size of Germany's reserve force, expanding from the current 100,000 trained reservists to as many as 200,000. Officials stress that this is not just about numbers, but about resilience, ensuring that Germany can mobilise rapidly in times of crisis. At the forefront of this reform is Defence Minister Boris Pistorius, who has made rebuilding the Bundeswehr a personal mission. Addressing journalists at a press conference, Pistorius declared bluntly that Germany needs more than just new tanks or advanced drones. The Bundeswehr must grow, he insisted. His target is ambitious: to raise troop numbers from today's 180,000 to 260,000 by the early 2030, meeting NATO's newly established force requirements. The numbers alone tell a story of urgency. Recruitment targets will begin modestly, with 20,000 volunteers expected in 2026. But by 2030, Berlin wants to almost double that figure to 38,000. And there is a clear warning embedded in the draft bill. If Germany cannot meet those targets, the government reserves the right to reinstate conscription. The possibility of bringing back compulsory military service, abolished in 2011, is no longer theoretical. It is back on the table, subject to parliamentary approval. That prospect touches a sensitive nerve in German society. The end of the draft in 2011 was celebrated as a break from Cold War militarism and a step toward a modern professional force. Many Germans viewed it as proof that the country had moved beyond its militarized past. Yet the invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Russia's aggressive posture, and the fear of a destabilized European neighborhood have all changed the political calculus. Today, a growing number of lawmakers and analysts believe Germany can no longer rely on professional soldiers alone. The voluntary scheme is presented as a compromise, a middle ground between civic responsibility and individual choice. Officials argue it could attract not only those considering a career in uniform, but also young people seeking to contribute to society before moving on to university or private careers. Supporters frame it as a new form of national service, preparing citizens for threats ranging from war to cyber attacks, even to natural disasters. Critics, however, warn that 6 months may not be long enough to produce a truly capable fighting force, and that voluntary enlistment will remain far from sufficient in a real emergency. But the military service bill is only part of a broader shift. On the same day, Berlin announced the creation of a permanent National Security Council, a structural reform long debated but never realised. The new council replaces the old Federal Security Council and Security Cabinet, bodies often seen as fragmented and reactive. By centralising decision-making, Chancellor Merz hopes to align Germany's long-term security planning with its allies, particularly the United States and Britain, both of which have long relied on similar institutions. At the same press conference, Merz emphasised European cooperation as well. He revealed that he had reached an understanding with French President Emmanuel Macron to settle, by the end of this year, the future of the much-delayed Future Combat Air System, or FCAS. This joint Franco-German-Spanish project, aimed at developing next-generation fighter jets and integrated combat systems, has been plagued by political disagreements and industrial rivalries. Yet its success is seen as a litmus test of Europe's ability to develop independent defence capabilities without relying solely on American technology. Taken together, these announcements mark one of the most significant realignments of German defence policy since the end of the Cold War. For decades, Germany prided itself on being a civilian power, reluctant to invest heavily in its military, preferring diplomacy and economic leverage. The abolition of the draft in 2011 was symbolic of that approach. But history has returned, and Berlin is being forced to adapt. Russia's war in Ukraine has reminded Germans that peace cannot be taken for granted, and that NATO commitments require both money and manpower. For many Germans, the debate over military service goes beyond strategy. It raises fundamental questions about identity, memory, and responsibility. Can a country with a deeply pacifist political culture truly embrace the idea of compulsory or semi-compulsory service again? Will voluntary service attract enough recruits, or will Germany have to compel its youth as it did for generations before 2011? Supporters of the bill argue that this is not about reviving old militarism, but about building resilience in a more dangerous world. Opponents counter that conscription is a blunt instrument, unlikely to provide the specialised skills modern militaries need. Yet both sides acknowledge the central reality. Germany must do more. The scale of the challenge is immense. Modernising the Bundeswehr requires not only people, but also equipment, logistics and political will. Billions of euros have already been allocated in special defence funds, but questions remain about whether the money is being spent efficiently and whether procurement reforms can keep up with operational demands. For Chancellor Merz, however, the stakes are also political. The creation of a National Security Council and the push for a new air combat system are not just about defence, they are about leadership. Berlin is signalling to its allies in NATO and the European Union that it is ready to shoulder more responsibility, ending years of criticism that Germany was Europe's economic giant but its military weak link. In the coming months, the draft bill will move to Parliament, where it is expected to trigger fierce debate. Some parties will push for faster, stronger commitments. Others will resist any step toward mandatory service. Meanwhile, young Germans, the generation that has known neither conscription nor war, will have to decide whether 6 months in uniform is a price they are willing to pay for national security. What is clear is that Germany's defence policy is no longer static. The quiet years after the Cold War, when security could be taken for granted, are gone. Today, Berlin is preparing for a harsher reality, one where deterrence, readiness and resilience may prove to be the only guarantees of peace. The draft bill is, in many ways, just the beginning. Whether through volunteers or through conscription, Germany is preparing its armed forces for the challenges of tomorrow. It is a message to allies, adversaries, and its own citizens alike. The era of complacency has ended, and the Bundeswehr is being built for a new age of uncertainty.